The first thing everyone noticed about the Ashcombe sisters was the contrast. Eleanor was beautiful in the way men expected beauty to be: pale golden hair, a delicate smile that seemed practiced before mirrors, eyes that lowered at precisely the right moment. Marianne was not. At least, that was the verdict of the drawing rooms and corridors of polite society. Her hair was too dark, her mouth too expressive, her gaze too steady. She had been called plain so often that the word had settled into her bones like a quiet ache. Lord Ashcombe loved Eleanor with the pride of a man who believed daughters were reflections of his own success. Marianne, on the other hand, was treated like an afterthought, useful, obedient, invisible. From the time she could walk, she had learned how to stand slightly behind, how to speak softly, how to accept leftovers of affection without complaint. So when word spread that the Duke of Ravenshallow was coming to Ashcombe Manor, no one wondered why the house was suddenly alive with nervous energy. The Duke was wealthy, powerful, and recently widowed. He needed a wife, and Lord Ashcombe needed an advantageous alliance. Eleanor was prepared for this moment since girlhood. Marianne was not prepared at all, because no one imagined she would be part of the equation. The Duke arrived on a grey afternoon, his carriage black and severe against the pale gravel drive. He was younger than Marianne expected, with dark hair touched faintly by silver and eyes that missed nothing. When he stepped into the drawing room, conversation seemed to shrink, as though the air itself grew cautious. Lord Ashcombe greeted him with excessive warmth, guiding him toward Eleanor at once. "My eldest daughter," he announced, pride ringing in every syllable. Eleanor rose gracefully, cheeks flushed just enough to seem modest. She curtsied perfectly. The Duke inclined his head. "Miss Ashcombe." Marianne stood near the window, half hidden by a heavy curtain, unnoticed and relieved. She watched as Eleanor smiled, laughed softly at the Duke's polite remarks, performed every gesture she had rehearsed. This was how it was meant to be. Dinner that evening was an elaborate affair. Lord Ashcombe ensured the Duke sat beside Eleanor, directing conversation toward her accomplishments, her singing, her needlework, her agreeable nature. Marianne listened quietly from across the table, answering only when addressed. The Duke spoke little, but his gaze moved often, drifting not only to Eleanor but to Marianne as well, lingering there a moment longer than courtesy required. It unsettled her. After the meal, music was requested. Eleanor sang, her voice sweet and trained. Applause followed, enthusiastic and approving. Marianne was asked to play the pianoforte afterward, more as an obligation than an invitation. She did so reluctantly, her fingers trembling at first, then steadying as the music carried her away. When she finished, the room was silent for a beat too long. "Thank you, Miss Marianne," the Duke said quietly. His voice held something thoughtful, something unreadable. That night, Lord Ashcombe slept easily, convinced matters were progressing exactly as intended. The next morning, the Duke requested a private walk in the gardens, with Lord Ashcombe. Eleanor was dressed in her finest, prepared to join them, but her father waved her away. "This is business," he said. "Men's matters." Marianne watched from an upstairs window as they walked among the frost-touched hedges. She did not know why her chest felt tight. In the rose garden, the Duke stopped. "You have 2 daughters," he said. "Yes," Lord Ashcombe replied briskly, already knowing where this conversation should lead. "Your eldest is lovely." Lord Ashcombe smiled. "Take the pretty one," he said without hesitation. "She will make you an excellent duchess. Gentle, obedient, admired by all." The Duke was silent. Lord Ashcombe chuckled, misreading the pause. "The younger is, well, she has her uses. Clever, perhaps, but not what a man like you requires." The Duke turned slowly. "Is that how you see her?" "As a second daughter," Lord Ashcombe replied. "Plain, quiet, grateful for whatever fortune comes her way." The Duke looked back toward the manor, where Marianne stood framed in glass, unaware she was being discussed like an object on a shelf. Something in his expression hardened, not with anger, but with resolve. "I will marry your younger daughter," he said. Lord Ashcombe laughed outright. "You jest." "I do not." Silence fell, heavy and shocked. "Why would you choose her?" Lord Ashcombe demanded. "Eleanor is beautiful," the Duke finished calmly. "Yes. And your younger daughter is honest. I have watched them both. One performs. The other listens. One seeks approval, the other seeks understanding. Lord Ashcomb's face darkened. She is not fit to be a duchess. The Duke met his gaze steadily. Then I will make her so. When the decision was announced, the household erupted. Eleanor wept openly, humiliated and furious. Lord Ashcombe argued, pleaded, even threatened. Society whispered. Marianne herself thought it must be a mistake. The Duke requested to speak with her alone. She stood before him in the small library, hands clasped tightly. You have chosen wrongly, she said at once. I am not what you want. I did not choose you for what I want, he replied. I chose you for who you are. She looked up, startled. You barely know me. I know enough, he said gently. And I would like to know more, if you are willing. No one had ever asked her that before. The wedding was quiet, almost austere. Eleanor did not attend. Lord Ashcombe barely concealed his resentment. Marianne walked down the aisle feeling as though she were stepping into a life meant for someone else. Ravenshallow was vast, ancient, intimidating. Marianne expected loneliness, cold formality, perhaps even regret. Instead, she found something unexpected, patience. The Duke did not demand perfection. He did not correct her manners sharply or mock her ignorance of courtly intrigue. He explained. He listened. When she spoke, he took her words seriously. Slowly, cautiously, Marianne began to breathe more freely than she ever had. Society watched closely, waiting for her failure. Instead, she surprised them. She learned quickly. She spoke with quiet conviction. She treated servants with kindness that inspired loyalty. She hosted gatherings that felt warm rather than performative. The Duke stood beside her, not in front of her. And in private, something gentle grew between them, trust first, then affection, then a love that felt steady and real rather than dazzling and fragile. News eventually reached Ashcombe Manor of Marianne's success. Of how the Duke looked at her as though she were the most remarkable woman in the room. Of how Ravenshallow flourished under her presence.
Happy tears, baby, Sarah managed, pulling her daughter into her arms. Mama's just very, very happy. She looked out the window and saw Richard Thornton getting into a black Mercedes. For just a moment, he glanced back at the diner, caught her eye through the window, and gave the smallest nod before driving away. Sarah understood now. The expensive suit, the cold demeanor, the zero tip, it was all part of the plan. He wanted privacy for his generosity, didn't want other customers or staff to see, didn't want to create a scene or expectation. He remembered what it was like to struggle, to work yourself to the bone and still wonder if it would be enough. That night, after her shift ended, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table with her bills spread out before her. She paid the rent that had been keeping her awake at night. She paid the electric bill, the water bill, the medical bills from Emma's last checkup. She bought groceries without checking prices. She ordered Emma those new shoes online, along with some warm clothes for winter. And then she opened a savings account, something she'd never been able to do before, and deposited $2,000. An emergency fund, a safety net, a cushion against the unexpected disasters that had always sent her spiraling. With the remaining money, she enrolled in online courses for medical billing and coding, something she'd always wanted to do but could never afford. A way to build a better future for Emma. But she also set aside $200 in a separate envelope, labeled simply, "Pay it forward." She didn't know when the moment would come, didn't know who would need it, but she would be ready. Because Richard Thornton had reminded her of something important, that kindness wasn't just about grand gestures or large amounts of money. It was about seeing people, really seeing them, and helping when you could. 3 months later, Sarah was training a new waitress at Rosie's, a young woman named Jennifer who reminded her so much of herself. Single mom, working multiple jobs, always worried, always tired, always trying. Sarah watched her carefully, remembering that day when everything changed. And she waited for her moment to pass along the gift she'd been given, knowing that somewhere, Richard Thornton was doing the same thing for someone else, creating ripples of kindness that spread further than any of them would ever know. The zero tip had hurt for exactly 30 seconds. But what she found underneath that plate had changed everything, not just her bank account, but her understanding of what it meant to truly help someone, and the responsibility that came with being helped. She still had the note, tucked safely in her wallet, a reminder that difficult moments don't last forever, that help can come from unexpected places, and that someday, She would be the one leaving an envelope under a plate for someone who needed it just as desperately as she had.